when it comes to Rafah, I do think that we will see Israel waiting until most of these people have somehow been evacuated. But I don't think that we're going to see Israel calling off this operation because there are still hostages in Rafah. And this, for Israel, is just justification for them going in there.
Now, Israel is facing growing international pressure not to launch a ground offensive in Rafah in southern Gaza. More than 1 million people are sheltering in the city, which Israel claims is a Hamas stronghold. President Biden said civilians in Rafah must be protected.
The major military operation in Rafah should not proceed without a credible plan for ensuring the safety and support of more than 1 million people sheltering there. Many people there have been displaced multiple times, fleeing the violence to the north, and now they're packed into Rafah, exposed and vulnerable. They need to be protected.
Well, according to reports, Biden has privately used derogatory language to refer to the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Bert Bruin is president of the Global Situation Room and a former White House Global Engagement Director. He says there are growing strains between the Biden administration and the Israeli government.
Essentially, they've been blown off. The latest example of this was when Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Israel last week, and Netanyahu essentially in public brushed off a lot of those suggestions, saying we're going to do whatever we want. And that's just not politically palatable here in Washington at the moment, as criticism increases both from Republicans, but principally from Democrats.
Meanwhile, many of this morning's papers carry photos of the highly emotional moment that Israeli hostages who were saved in Sunday night's raid on Rafah were reunited with their families. We can cross live now to Tel Aviv and speak to Jotam Confino, foreign editor for Jewish News. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start with the return of those hostages. What do we know about the identity of those who were freed?
We know that we're talking about two elder men, aged 61 and 70. They were both abducted on October 7th from the same kibbutz, and they're both immigrants from Argentina. And also several of their relatives were abducted with them on October 7th, but they were later released in the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas in November. They're in their medical condition is decent. They've both undergone medical checks, both on the ground, but also at the hospital. And they seem to be okay compared to other hostages who've been released. And also we hear that they were held in a civilian home. This hasn't been confirmed, but it's something that the Israeli media has reported. And they're yet to speak to the Israeli media. So we don't know their story. We don't know what they went through. But I'm sure they will be speaking anytime soon.
Obviously, this comes amid the reports that Israel is planning a ground offensive in Rafah, which it says is a Hamas stronghold. However, we have heard these warnings from many of Israel's Western allies, including the US and the UK and others, that it should show restraint or at the very least do some proper planning before going in. Is it your sense, Jotam, that the Israeli government will heed these warnings?
I think so. And I think Israel has also listened to those warnings throughout the war. In the beginning, Israel gave Gazans in North Gaza 24 hours to evacuate in the very beginning of the war. And that deadline was extended for 3 weeks, mainly due to pressure from the United States. So this is the same that we're seeing now. The United States is continuing to keep Israel in check to make sure that they at least try to adhere to international law. Obviously, sometimes they are breaking it. We've seen numerous accounts of that. But when it comes to Rafah, I do think that we will see Israel waiting until most of these people have somehow been evacuated. But I don't think that we're going to see Israel calling off this operation because there are still hostages in Rafah. And this, for Israel, is just justification for them going in there, in addition to, of course, removing the last of the Hamas battalions. But as long as there are hostages in areas in Gaza, Israel will continue to operate militarily. It's quite simple.
And when you say Israel will likely wait until civilians have been evacuated to where?
Yeah, well, that's the next question. There are two options. Both options aren't good because one of them is unrealistic, and that is Egypt opening its borders. That would be by far the most ideal solution to all of this. They would actually be safe in the Sinai Desert. There are countries lining up to help them from all around the world, international organizations, countries helping set up refugee camps, if that were the case. But Egypt has repeatedly said they're not interested in that. So that I don't think we should even think of as a realistic option. But it's important to mention it because Egypt could actually save these people if it wanted to. The other option will be to simply send them to other areas in Gaza, central Gaza, northern Gaza, where Israel are no longer present militarily. But most of these areas are heavily damaged. Most of these homes are either destroyed or damaged. So they would have to set up field hospitals there and new refugee camps. So either way, this is really just a disaster for civilians.
Jotam, thank you. Jotam Confino there, foreign editor for Jewish News, speaking to us live from Tel Aviv.